Fox keeps visiting elderly man's home. The reason will melt your heart. The first time Henry saw the fox, it was a crisp autumn morning. The leaves on the oak tree in his yard had turned shades of gold and red, and the air was alive with the scent of damp earth. He was sipping his coffee by the kitchen window when a flicker of movement caught his eye. There, at the edge of his garden, stood a sleek red fox. Its fur was vibrant against the backdrop of fallen leaves, and its sharp eyes seemed to study him through the glass. Henry froze, unsure of what to do. Wild animals weren't uncommon in the countryside, but a fox venturing this close to his house was unusual. The fox didn't seem afraid though. It sat on its haunches, its bushy tail curled neatly around its paws as if it belonged there. After a few minutes, it trotted off into the woods, leaving Henry with a sense of wonder. The fox returned the next morning. This time, it was closer, sniffing around the garden as if searching for something. Henry watched it from the window, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Well, aren't you a curious one?" he muttered, more to himself than to the animal. The fox stayed longer this time, circling the yard before disappearing into the trees. By the third visit, Henry couldn't resist. He stepped onto the porch, his coffee mug warming his hands. "What brings you here, little friend?" he called softly. The fox tilted its head, its ears flicking at the sound of his voice. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, two solitary figures meeting in the quiet of the morning. Days turned into weeks, and the fox's visits became a daily occurrence. Henry began to leave scraps of food at the edge of the garden, a small offering that the fox eagerly accepted. Each morning, the ritual repeated. The fox would appear, Henry would place the food outside, and they would share a moment of silent companionship. The visits brought a spark to Henry's otherwise quiet life. Since his wife had passed away 3 years earlier, his days had fallen into a monotonous routine. The fox's presence was a welcome change, a connection to something wild and alive. It gave him a reason to wake up each morning with a sense of anticipation. But Henry couldn't help wondering what had drawn the fox to his home in the first place. Was it simply the food, or was there something more? He decided to keep a journal, documenting the fox's behavior and their interactions. Over time, he noticed patterns. The fox seemed to arrive around the same time each day, always pausing near a particular patch of flowers before venturing closer. One evening, as Henry reviewed his notes, a memory surfaced. A faint but vivid recollection of his wife, Margaret, tending to the very same patch of flowers. She had planted them years ago, calling them her lucky blooms because they always seemed to flourish no matter the weather. Henry hadn't paid them much attention since her passing, but now he wondered if the fox's visits had something to do with the garden. Curiosity spurred Henry to spend more time outside, tending to the neglected flower bed. He weeded, watered, and pruned, the repetitive tasks bringing a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. The fox watched from a distance, its amber eyes following his every move. One afternoon, as Henry knelt in the garden, the fox approached him for the first time. It moved cautiously, its movements fluid and deliberate. Henry held his breath, staying perfectly still as the fox came within a few feet of him. It sniffed the air, then sat down, its gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart ache. The fox's closeness that afternoon marked a turning point in their relationship. Each day it seemed to grow more comfortable around Henry. It would linger longer in the garden, sometimes lying down near the flower bed as Henry worked. Henry began to speak to the fox in soft tones, sharing bits of his day as though it were an old friend. "You know," he said one afternoon, leaning on his trowel, "Margaret would have loved you. She always had a soft spot for animals." The fox's ears twitched as though it understood, its amber eyes locked on his. Henry chuckled. "Maybe you're here because of her. Wouldn't that be something?" The thought stuck with him, growing stronger with each passing day. Margaret had always believed in signs, little moments of serendipity that connected the living world with something greater. Henry had dismissed it as fanciful at the time, but now, with the fox's visits so regular and deliberate, he couldn't help but wonder. One morning, Henry decided to follow the fox. It arrived as usual, sniffing the edge of the garden before heading toward the woods. This time, Henry quietly slipped on his boots and coat and trailed behind it at a safe distance. The fox moved with purpose, weaving through the trees as though following an invisible path. The trail led to a small clearing deep in the woods. Henry stopped at the edge, watching as the fox approached a hollow in the base of an old oak tree. It sniffed around the opening before disappearing inside. Henry waited, his breath visible in the crisp morning air, until the fox emerged moments later, carrying something in its mouth. It was a small weathered glove. The sight made Henry's heart lurch. It was familiar, Not just any glove, but one from a pair Margaret used to wear when she worked in the garden. He had thought they were long lost, buried under years of neglect and overgrowth. Henry crouched as the fox approached him, the glove dangling from its mouth. It stopped a few feet away, dropping the glove at his feet and stepping back as if waiting for him to take it. Tentatively, Henry picked it up, his hands trembling. The leather was worn and faded, but there was no mistaking it. The faint scent of earth and flowers lingered, a remnant of Margaret's many hours tending to her beloved garden. "How did you?" Henry's voice broke, tears welling in his eyes. He looked at the fox, its gaze steady and unflinching. "Did you bring me this?" The fox tilted its head before trotting back toward the hollow. It disappeared once more and returned with another item, a small hand spade, rusted but intact. Henry stared in disbelief as it placed the spade beside him, then sat down, its tail curling around its paws. Over the next hour, the fox continued its strange ritual, retrieving items from the hollow and bringing them to Henry. A garden trowel, a piece of ribbon, and finally, a weathered notebook, the one Margaret had used to record her thoughts about the flowers she planted and the stories she loved to write in her spare time. Each item was a fragment of her life, forgotten until now. Henry's hands shook as he opened the notebook, the pages slightly yellowed but still legible. Margaret's handwriting, delicate and looping, filled the pages with notes about the garden, reflections on her favorite books, and little sketches of flowers and animals. He felt her presence in every word, as though she were sitting beside him, guiding him back to memories he had buried under grief. The fox watched silently as Henry sat in the clearing, overwhelmed by the discoveries. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you." That evening, back at the house, Henry carefully cleaned and arranged the items the fox had brought him. He placed the glove, the notebook, and the tools on the mantel above the fireplace, creating a small tribute to Margaret. The fox lingered in the garden, its eyes following him through the window as he worked. For the first time in years, Henry felt a sense of connection, not just to Margaret's memory but to the life that still surrounded him. The fox's visits weren't just chance encounters, they were a bridge to something he had thought he'd lost forever. In the days that followed, Henry began to notice changes in himself. The fox's visits had rekindled a part of him that had lain dormant since Margaret's passing. Each morning, he woke with a sense of purpose, eager to tend to the garden or sort through the items the fox had brought him. The connection between the fox and the memories of his wife felt like a lifeline, pulling him out of the solitude that had once enveloped him. He started spending more time outdoors, repairing the old birdhouses Margaret had built and planting new seeds in her flower beds. The fox became his silent companion, watching from the shade as Henry worked. Sometimes it would bring him small gifts, a feather, a smooth stone, or even a faded button. Henry carefully added each item to the mantel, feeling as though the fox were helping him piece together not just memories, but a new chapter of his life. One afternoon, as Henry dug in the garden, he unearthed an old tin box buried beneath the soil. The box was rusted shut, but after some careful prying he managed to open it. Inside he found more of Margaret's belongings, a pair of earrings, a dried flower pressed between sheets of parchment, and a folded note. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper, revealing Margaret's neat handwriting. "For my love, Henry. If you ever find this, it means I've gone ahead of you. But don't be sad, I'm always with you in every flower you tend, every bird you feed, and every sunrise you watch. Keep living, Henry. The world is still full of beauty and you deserve to see it. Love always, Margaret." Tears blurred Henry's vision as he read the words, his heart aching with both grief and gratitude. He looked up to see the fox sitting at the edge of the garden, its amber eyes fixed on him. It felt as though the fox had led him to this moment, guiding him to a message he had needed more than anything. "Thank you," Henry whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for bringing me back to her." That evening, Henry sat by the fireplace, the tin box and its contents placed beside him. The fox lay curled up just outside the window, its presence a comfort even in the quiet. For the first time in years, Henry allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his grief, not as a burden, but as a testament to the love he and Margaret had shared. The next morning, Henry began writing in the notebook Margaret had left behind. Inspired by her words, he recorded his thoughts about the garden, the fox, and the ways Margaret's memory continued to shape his days. Writing became a new ritual, one that brought him closer to her while also helping him find his own voice. As the weeks turned into months, Henry and the fox developed a routine that felt almost like a partnership. The fox would arrive in the morning, watching as Henry tended to the garden or fed the birds. Occasionally it would bring a new gift, adding to the small collection on the mantel. In return, Henry left food for the fox, always marveling at its quiet intelligence and unspoken understanding. Word of Henry's unusual visitor spread through the small town. Neighbors stopped by to see the fox, intrigued by its loyalty and frequent visits. Children brought drawings of the fox and the garden, which Henry proudly displayed alongside Margaret's sketches. One day, a young boy named Leo, who had recently lost his own grandmother, asked Henry, "Why does the fox keep coming back to you?" Henry smiled, his eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and wonder. "I think it's here to remind me that even when we lose someone we love, their spirit can live on in the most unexpected ways. You just have to look for the signs." The fox's visits continued through the changing seasons, its presence becoming a symbol of hope not just for Henry, but for everyone who heard his story. Neighbors began calling it Margaret's fox, a name that filled Henry with both warmth and a sense of purpose. The connection between him, the fox, and Margaret's memory became a shared inspiration, reminding the community of the enduring power of love. As time passed, the bond between Henry and the fox deepened in ways that surprised even him. The fox began venturing closer to the house, sometimes curling up on the porch as Henry sat in his rocking chair. Its visits weren't just fleeting moments anymore. They felt purposeful, as if the fox had become a guardian of sorts, watching over him and the home he shared with Margaret for so many years. Henry often found himself talking to the fox as though it could understand him. "You've done so much for me," he said one evening as the fox lounged nearby, its ears twitching at the sound of his voice. "You've brought me back to the things I thought I'd lost forever." He glanced toward the garden, now flourishing under his care. The flowers Margaret had planted bloomed in brilliant colors, their beauty a testament to the love and dedication she had poured into them. Henry couldn't help but feel that her presence lingered in every petal and leaf, a quiet reminder of the life they had built together. One sunny morning, as Henry sipped his coffee on the porch, the fox arrived with something unusual in its mouth, a small, shiny trinket that glinted in the sunlight. Curious, Henry stepped forward as the fox dropped the item at his feet. It was an old locket, tarnished but still intact. He opened it carefully, revealing a tiny photograph of a younger Margaret smiling back at him. Henry's breath caught. He hadn't seen the locket in years. He thought it had been lost during a move long ago. "How did you find this?" he murmured, his voice filled with awe. The fox tilted its head, its eyes calm and knowing. The locket felt like the final piece of a puzzle, a symbol of the enduring connection between him and Margaret. Holding it in his hands, he felt a profound sense of peace, as though the fox had helped him rediscover not just the tangible pieces of his wife's life, but also the intangible love that still filled his heart. Word of the fox's incredible behavior spread even further, drawing visitors and local journalists to Henry's home. Though he was hesitant about the attention, Henry saw it as an opportunity to share his story. He spoke not only of the fox's mysterious actions but also of the ways it had brought him back to life after years of grief. "It's not just about what the fox brought me," he explained to a young reporter. "It's about what it reminded me of, that love doesn't disappear when someone we care about is gone. It stays with us, in the little things we do, in the memories we cherish, and sometimes, in the most unexpected visitors." One evening, as the sun set and cast a golden glow over the garden, Henry sat on the porch with the locket in his hands. The fox was there too, lying at his feet with its tail wrapped around its body. The scene was so peaceful, so full of quiet understanding, that Henry felt a surge of gratitude unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice breaking, "for bringing me back to her. For helping me remember." The fox lifted its head, its eyes meeting his in a moment of shared recognition. Then, with the grace of a creature untouched by time, it rose and trotted back toward the woods, pausing once to glance back before disappearing into the trees. The next morning the fox didn't appear. Henry sat by the window as usual, his coffee growing cold in his hands, waiting for the familiar flash of red fur at the garden's edge. But the hours stretched on and the yard remained empty. A sense of longing crept into his heart, though it was softened by the profound gratitude he felt for everything the fox had brought into his life. Days turned into weeks, and though the fox did not return, its presence lingered in every corner of Henry's home and heart. The items it had retrieved, the glove, the tools, the notebook and the locket, now sat proudly on the mantel, a quiet tribute to Margaret and the extraordinary creature that had led him back to her memory. Henry's life, once so steeped in solitude, had blossomed into something vibrant and meaningful. He continued to tend to the garden, now a riot of colors and life, drawing neighbors and children who came to marvel at its beauty. He wrote daily in Margaret's notebook, filling its pages with reflections, stories, and observations about the world around him. One spring morning, as Henry walked through the garden, he felt a familiar tug of emotion. The flowers were in full bloom, their vibrant petals swaying gently in the breeze. Birds flitted between the branches of the oak tree, their songs filling the air with joy. It was a scene Margaret would have loved, a celebration of the life she had nurtured and the love she had shared. Henry stopped by the spot where the fox had first appeared, the grass now thick and green. "You gave me more than I could have ever asked for," he said softly as though speaking to the wind. "You brought me back to her." For a moment, he thought he saw a flash of red among the trees, a fleeting glimpse of the fox's tail as it disappeared into the woods. But when he looked again, the clearing was empty. He smiled to himself, his heart light. Whether it was real or imagined didn't matter. What mattered was the peace that had taken root in his soul, the sense of connection that would never fade. As the years went by, Henry's story became a cherished tale in the community. Children who visited the garden grew up hearing about the fox that had changed his life, its actions woven into a legend of love and resilience. Neighbors often stopped by to help with the garden or simply sit on the porch, listening to Henry's gentle wisdom. On the anniversary of Margaret's passing, Henry planted a new tree in the garden, a sapling that he hoped would grow tall and strong, its branches offering shade and shelter for generations to come. He placed the locket at its base, burying it gently in the soil as a symbol of the love that had endured beyond loss. "This is for you," he whispered, his voice steady. "For everything you gave me and for the life we shared." When Henry passed peacefully in his sleep years later, the garden was in full bloom. His story and the fox's legacy lived on in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by it. The house and garden became a memorial of sorts, a place where people came to reflect, find inspiration, and connect with the enduring power of love. And somewhere in the woods, among the whispering trees and the dappled sunlight, a red fox paused at the edge of a clearing, its amber eyes scanning the horizon before trotting quietly into the distance, its purpose fulfilled, its story eternal. Henry's passing left an indelible mark on the community. His garden, now a sanctuary of vibrant blooms and life, became a cherished gathering place for those who sought solace, inspiration, or simply a moment of peace. The neighbors who had once been strangers to Henry took it upon themselves to care for the garden, preserving it as a living tribute to the man and the love he had rediscovered through the fox's visits. Children would often gather by the oak tree where Henry had planted the sapling, now growing tall and sturdy. They'd listen to stories of Margaret's fox, passed down from parents who had once been captivated by the tale themselves. The fox became a symbol of mystery, love, and the enduring connections that transcend time and loss. Emily, a young woman who had often visited Henry during his final years, took on the role of caretaker for the garden. Inspired by Henry's story, she turned the house and grounds into a small public space called the Garden of Memories. Visitors came from near and far, drawn by the legend of the fox and the life it had touched. Inside the house, Emily created a small exhibit featuring the items the fox had retrieved: the glove, the tools, and the locket, all displayed alongside Margaret's notebook and the stories Henry had written. The mantle remained as Henry had left it, a quiet yet powerful reminder of the love that had shaped his life. One particular plaque at the exhibit read, "Love doesn't end, it transforms, finding its way back to us in the most unexpected forms." This garden is a testament to the connections we nurture, the memories we hold dear, and the lives we continue to honor. The community's bond grew stronger through their shared efforts to maintain the garden and share Henry's story. People who had once been isolated found connection through the lessons Henry had imparted, both in life and through the legacy he left behind. One day, a young boy named Sam, visiting with his parents, asked Emily, "Do you think the fox will come back?" Emily smiled, kneeling beside him. "Maybe it already has," she said, gesturing toward the garden teeming with life. "In every flower that blooms, in every bird that sings, and in every person who carries this story forward, the fox's spirit lives on." Sam nodded thoughtfully, then wandered off to explore the garden, his small hands brushing the petals of flowers as if carrying forward the love that had been planted there. Years later, long after the fox's story had become legend, visitors to the garden continued to report sightings of a red fox near the oak tree. Whether it was the same fox or another who had taken its place, no one could say. But for those who saw it, the sight felt like a quiet reassurance, a gentle reminder that love, like the fox, has a way of finding its way back to us when we need it most. And so, Henry's story endured, woven into the fabric of the community and the garden that bore his name. The fox's purpose had been fulfilled, but its legacy, of love, connection, and healing, remained eternal. Somewhere, in the quiet corners of the woods, the spirit of the fox lingered, its watchful gaze now turned toward the horizon, where new stories of love and resilience waited to unfold. As the years passed, the Garden of Memories became more than just a place of reflection. It grew into a beacon for those seeking healing and connection. Visitors from all walks of life found solace in the beauty of the garden and inspiration in the story of Henry, Margaret, and the fox. It was a story that resonated deeply, not because it was extraordinary, but because it spoke to something universal: the unyielding ties of love and the gentle reminders of its presence in the world around us. Artists painted the garden, capturing its vibrant blooms and the imagined figure of the fox weaving between the flowers. Writers penned poems and stories inspired by the quiet yet profound bond between Henry and the mysterious creature. Musicians composed melodies that seemed to echo the whispers of the trees and the rustle of leaves where the fox had once disappeared. Among the many visitors was a young woman named Clara, who had recently lost her father. She came to the garden searching for a sense of peace, her grief weighing heavily on her shoulders. As she walked among the flowers, she stumbled upon the plaque beneath the oak tree, its inscription catching her eye. "Love transforms, finding its way back to us in the most unexpected forms." The words brought tears to her eyes. For the first time since her father's passing, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that he was still with her, not in the way she had known, but in every memory, every moment of love she carried forward. She left the garden that day with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired to honor her father's legacy by living a life filled with kindness and connection. The garden became a place of quiet miracles, where those who visited often left with more than they had brought. The legend of the fox continued to grow, fueled by occasional sightings of a red blur darting through the woods or a solitary figure sitting at the edge of the clearing. Whether it was the same fox, a descendant, or simply a story that came to life in the imaginations of those who believed, no one could say. But its presence, real or symbolic, remained a source of wonder. Emily, now the garden's long-standing caretaker, often reflected on the legacy she had been entrusted to preserve. She added her own touch to the house and grounds, creating spaces for meditation, storytelling, and quiet contemplation. Under her care, the garden thrived, its beauty expanding to include new paths, sculptures, and flowers, all while maintaining the soul of what Henry and Margaret had built. One day, as Emily prepared for the garden's annual celebration, she noticed a small boy standing near the oak tree, staring intently into the woods. He turned to her, his wide eyes filled with excitement. "I saw it," he said breathlessly. "The fox. It was right there watching me." Emily smiled, her heart warming at his wonder. "What do you think it wanted?" she asked gently. The boy thought for a moment before replying, "I think it wanted me to know I'm not alone." Emily knelt down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly what the fox came to tell us all." The garden's anniversary celebration brought together hundreds of people, those who had been touched by Henry's story and newcomers eager to learn about the legend. As the sun set, casting golden light over the flowers, Emily stood to address the crowd. She shared the tale of the fox, Henry, and Margaret, her voice carrying the quiet reverence of someone who knew its truth deeply. "This garden was born out of love," she said. "Not just the love Henry and Margaret shared, but the love they gave to the world. The fox reminded us of something we often forget, that love never truly leaves us. It changes, it grows, and sometimes, it finds us again when we least expect it." Her words lingered in the air as the crowd watched the golden light fade into twilight. In the distance, a lone fox's silhouette appeared at the edge of the woods, its amber eyes catching the last rays of the sun before it slipped silently into the trees. And so, the fox's legend lived on, woven into the hearts of those who visited the garden. Henry's story became more than a memory, it became a guide for living, a testament to the enduring power of love, the connections we nurture, and the beauty of finding meaning in even the smallest moments. Somewhere in the quiet corners of the world, the spirit of the fox lingered, a timeless reminder that love, like the seasons, is eternal, always changing yet always returning. One evening, as Emily prepared to close the garden gates after another busy day of visitors, a fierce storm rolled in without warning. The wind howled through the trees, bending their branches and sending leaves swirling across the paths. Lightning split the sky, and rain began to pour in relentless sheets. Emily hurried to secure the garden's displays, shielding the treasured mementos from the elements. As she worked, a sharp bark of thunder startled her, and she thought she heard something else, a sharp, high-pitched yelp carried on the wind. She froze, listening carefully. The sound came again, this time unmistakable, the cry of an animal in distress. Grabbing her flashlight, Emily ventured into the garden, the storm lashing against her as she searched for the source of the sound. Her heart pounded as she swept the beam of light across the paths and flower beds, calling out into the darkness. "Hello? Is someone there?" The cry grew louder, leading her toward the oak tree at the edge of the clearing. Her flashlight illuminated a small figure huddled beneath its branches, a fox, soaked and trembling, its leg caught in a tangle of brambles. Its amber eyes flashed with fear as she approached. "Easy now," Emily said softly, her voice steady despite the storm. She knelt beside the fox, her hands trembling as she worked to free its leg from the thorns. The fox whimpered, its body rigid with pain, but it didn't try to run. Emily's heart ached at the sight of its vulnerability, a stark contrast to the proud, mysterious creature that had always seemed untouchable. Finally, she managed to free the fox, wrapping it gently in her coat to shield it from the rain. "I've got you," she murmured, cradling it in her arms. "You're safe now." As she made her way back to the house, battling the storm with each step, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was more than just a rescue. The fox's appearance during the storm at the very tree that had been so central to Henry's story felt like a message, a call to action, a test of the connection the fox had always represented. Inside the house, Emily carefully tended to the fox, cleaning its wounds and wrapping its injured leg. It lay quietly on the floor near the fire, its breathing shallow but steady. Emily stayed by its side through the night, her thoughts swirling with memories of Henry, Margaret, and the countless lives the fox's story had touched. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and glistening in the sunlight. The fox stirred, its eyes opening to meet Emily's. There was something profound in its gaze, a mix of gratitude and trust that left her breathless. "You've done so much for us," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Now it's my turn to help you." As the fox recovered under Emily's care, the community rallied around her, drawn by the news of its rescue. People brought supplies and shared their own stories of the fox, tales of fleeting sightings, quiet moments of connection, and the ways it had inspired them to live with more love and purpose. The garden became a hub of activity, its paths filled with visitors who came to see the fox and honor the legacy it represented. Emily, though overwhelmed at times, found strength in the support of those around her. The fox's presence, even in its weakened state, seemed to radiate a quiet resilience that reminded everyone of the power of hope. As the fox grew stronger, Emily faced a difficult decision. She knew that it belonged in the wild, where it could live freely and continue its mysterious journey. But letting go was harder than she had expected. The bond they had formed during its recovery felt like a continuation of Henry's story, a reminder that love, even when it's fleeting, leaves a lasting mark. On the morning of the fox's release, the entire community gathered at the garden to say goodbye. Emily carried the fox to the edge of the woods, her heart heavy but full of gratitude. As she knelt to set it down, the fox turned to look at her one last time, its amber eyes filled with something she could only describe as understanding. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything." The fox trotted into the trees, pausing once to glance back before disappearing into the dappled sunlight. The crowd stood in silence, their hearts full of the story they had all been a part of. The days following the fox's release were bittersweet for Emily and the community. The garden felt quieter without the fox's presence, yet its absence seemed to deepen its meaning. For Emily, every corner of the garden, every flower and tree, carried the memory of the fox's visits. Its spirit, like Henry's and Margaret's, felt woven into the fabric of the place. The story of the fox's rescue and release spread far and wide, drawing more visitors than ever before. Families came to share in the garden's peace, teachers brought students to learn about its history, and travelers seeking inspiration found solace among its paths. The fox's tale became a symbol of resilience, love, and the unspoken connections that bind us all. Emily continued her work in the garden with a renewed sense of purpose. She expanded its programs, creating spaces for healing, creativity, and storytelling. A new plaque was installed beneath the oak tree, its inscription a tribute to the fox. "For the fox who brought us together, a messenger of love, resilience, and the power of connection. May its spirit inspire us to see the beauty in every moment." One quiet evening, as Emily walked through the garden, she paused by the oak tree and sat beneath its sprawling branches. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and pink. She closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. Henry's gentle wisdom, Margaret's vibrant love for life, and the fox's quiet, mysterious presence. As she sat there, a rustle in the bushes caught her attention. She opened her eyes, her breath hitching as a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. It was a fox, perhaps not the same one, but its amber eyes and graceful movements mirrored the one she had come to know and love. The fox stood at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed on her. For a moment time seemed to stand still. Emily felt her heart swell with a mix of wonder and peace, as though the universe were offering her a reminder of all she had learned. The fox lingered for a moment before turning and disappearing into the woods, its silhouette fading into the twilight. Emily smiled, her tears falling freely. It didn't matter if this fox was the same one or another. Its presence felt like a gift, a continuation of the story she was now a part of. The years went on, but the legacy of the fox and the garden endured. Emily, now older but as vibrant as ever, often reflected on the profound ways the fox had changed her life and the lives of everyone it had touched. She saw its influence in the smiles of visitors, in the laughter of children playing among the flowers, and in the quiet moments of connection shared beneath the oak tree. The garden, once a quiet place of reflection, had become a sanctuary of life and love, a testament to the enduring power of connection. And though the fox was no longer a daily presence, its spirit remained eternal, alive in every corner of the garden and every heart that carried its story forward. Somewhere in the quiet expanse of the woods, a fox trotted through the trees, its amber eyes scanning the horizon. It paused at the edge of a clearing, the scent of flowers drifting on the breeze. And as it moved into the distance, its graceful figure disappeared into the golden light, a symbol of love, resilience, and the unbroken bonds that tie us all together.